So week 6, let's go with buys, trade targets.
Buy lows, trade targets.
Yeah, anybody. I mean, they don't have to be a buy low. It could just be a general trade target. Somebody we're keying in on for the rest of the season.
Yeah.
Not Keenan Allen, but keying in on.
Rest in peace, Rips.
R.I.P. So, who's it going to be? Who's going to start it off for the segment? Week 6 buy.
I am going to start with the controversial one. By controversial, I mean not at all. Probably a common one. Lamar Miller. Lamarzard Miller, our boy.
What?
The dude that we pumped all preseason as a top 3 running back. He has not performed that way.
The volume's been there.
The volume
has been there. Yeah. The production has not quite been there. But it will come.
Yes.
Right? Hopefully for the Lamar Miller owners.
The volume wasn't there last week, but that had more to do with that offense just being under siege by Minnesota, who is just looking like the best defense that's ever existed in the history of the NFL at this point. Like, no offense seems to be able to function against Minnesota right now.
That's their front seven is absurd.
Yeah.
Like, quarterbacks can't get comfortable. We've seen them basically shut down both top tier receivers and running backs throughout the course of the entire season. So, I mean, you can't really look to last week's performance and say, oh, well, Lamar Miller, he's a bust. He can't score. I mean, he had a terrible game, but so did the entire Houston offense. So, realistically, you're trying to grab him at the lowest value he'll be all year because he gets some cake matchups coming up. So you want to take advantage of that. Point to the Minnesota game where he put up, just over 2 points, which is terrible. And maybe the fantasy owner is sick of Lamar Miller at this point. It's been 5 weeks of, he's had a solid floor, but he hasn't really had that big game. And they probably drafted Lamar Miller in the first round. Yeah. So they could be willing to part ways. Now, obviously, he's not going to be a super cheap buy, but
no,
I think if you can go out there and put a package together to get a Lamar Miller, now's the time. And that's all there is to say about that.
Yeah, his schedule gets the reason he's a buy this week is he gets Indy this week, who are one of the worst run defenses right now.
In the history of the
NFL. So this could be finally his big breakout week. His schedule's been kind of tough so far this year. Not so much with week 1, Chicago, but then he faced New England and Tennessee and Minnesota 3 weeks in a row, which are all pretty decent run defenses, especially Minnesota. But now it opens up a bit. Indy, Denver, which is not a scary run defense. Detroit, which isn't scary. And then after the bye, Jacksonville, Oakland, San Diego. It's pretty good. Green Bay is his only bad matchup after the bye. So things soften up for him quite a bit from here. The touchdowns will come. I saw some stat that at this point he is either tied or very near the record for most carries without a touchdown in a season. So it's just
He's going full Melvin Gordon.
It's not going to happen. It's going to happen at some point with just the volume he's getting. So the touchdowns are coming. And the yardage was there until this last week, which is why he's an interesting target now because he has the soft matchup this week. He has coming off a 1-down week, and he hasn't had any stellar weeks yet. So the owner of Lamar Miller might just be frustrated at this point. I'm like, oh, man, he isn't returning this first-round value. He's really been kind of a low-end RB2 is what he's been giving you. So you might be able to – this is the cheapest he's probably going to be all year if he's going to bounce back like we're expecting.
I mean, you really should.
Yeah.
And we also have to remember that they made the switch with Bill O'Brien. He started to take over the offensive play calling last week in Minnesota. So there could have been, a transition period there. I mean, he is a head coach, so he should understand the offense. But anytime there is a play calling switch within the organization, it can take a little while. From what I was reading, most people were pleased that Bill O'Brien was going to start making the calls for the offense. They think that it will, ignite DeAndre Hopkins, who has had a relatively quiet fantasy season. He did have a garbage time touchdown in that game against Minnesota, but so far he hasn't been the field spreader, the wide receiver that is just going to kind of allow Lamar Miller to feast. That was our whole narrative going in, was all right, they have these downfield burners in DeAndre Hopkins and Will Fuller, Brock Osweiler should be able to get them involved. He's been bad this year, Brock Osweiler.
Yeah.
I feel like he's kind of hurt Lamar Miller a little bit and that entire offense. So I need to see him turn it around. But Lamar Miller, for the most part, has proven that he has a really high floor, I should say. And the touchdowns are going to come. That's all there really is to analyze there, is that, okay, his volume is incredibly high. Forget the Minnesota game where they were down by like 20-something points right off the bat.
Yeah.
And they had no reason to put him in the game in the third and fourth quarter when it was clearly out of hand. They started giving Alfred Blue carries. So that game was an anomaly. So you can't really look at that. But before that, the volume was insane, near the top. So that's what you're looking for, is touches, opportunities, and the touchdowns will come. I think I want to see them get more red zone chances and get Lamar Miller more involved in the red zone. But he's definitely a buy target. Let's move on from Lamar Miller. Who's next up in the lineup?
Another guy that I'm looking to buy, I don't even know if I mentioned this guy off air, but I think he's worth talking about, is Brandin Cooks.
B.
Cooks of the Nowlin Saints. Outside of his
many mouths to feed.
Maybe. Outside of his week 1 outburst, which mostly came off a broken play against the worst corner in the league, you would probably say, as a Raiders fan. No, would you not say that?
No. He's been good since
he actually has been since that. But yeah, other than that, basically one big play. He's been pretty quiet. But now he's coming out of the bye week. He's at home, and just like Drew Brees has these kind of crazy home road splits, so does Brandin Cooks. He's pretty much attached right to that. So he's coming off. He has this home game. And the sort of real benefit of Cooks is his playoff schedule is really soft.
Hit me with it.
Week 12 through 16 is Rams, Lions, Bucks, Cardinals, and then Bucks again. So that's, the Bucks twice in there is pretty valuable for sure. And the Rams secondary isn't scary. Detroit secondary isn't. Arizona's the only one you might be a little worried about, but other than that, it's pretty soft. And the benefit with Cooks is that, he's probably being viewed as a bust by the owner that took Cooks, who took him with a third-round pick likely and has really only gotten one good week out of him. So I'm on board paying a little bit for him if you're desperate for wide receiver and you're kind of stacked a little bit at running back. I'd be willing to do it. I'd be willing to. What's a good example? Maybe if you're a Tevin Coleman owner, you might be able to swing Tevin Coleman to Brandin Cooks if they're in need of a running back. Maybe Isaiah Crowell, who outside of last week has had a lot of good production, so that might be a trade that's viable, and I would do any of those.
Yeah. One thing I want to watch, I don't have a problem with buying Brandin Cooks, but I definitely want to see, Snead has been banged up.
Yeah.
But even so, the last game that they played, Michael Thomas seemed like he was kind of the go-to wide receiver for a couple games in a row. And you might look at the target numbers and say, okay, that's a mirage because Snead's been banged up. But the thing that I noticed is that they were heavily targeting or looking Michael Thomas's way in the red zone, which is something I want to pay attention to within the next couple of games. Because if Snead comes back, he's over this toe injury, then you're looking at Brandin Cooks, Willie Snead, Michael Thomas,
right,
Kobe Fleener. Drew Brees is going to spread the ball around, but if he has Michael Thomas, if Michael Thomas becomes that red zone guy, even with a healthy Snead, which is what I'm going to keep my eye on, then I think Cooks is going to turn into the definition of boom or bust.
Yeah.
Where if he hits that home run play, you're good for the week, but if he doesn't, then he's going to put up weeks exactly like he has been in the past couple of matchups. So it could be the time to buy him low. I don't know if personally I feel comfortable doing that at the moment. I would wait and see, but
that's pretty fair. I'm not calling him like Lamar Miller, where it's you should go out and try to get him this week. He's more of if you really need wide receiver help. He's a good owner to poke at. Something that kind of helps the Brandin Cooks narrative is that he faced Trufant and a healthy Verrett in 2 of his 4 weeks, and he has historically never been good against elite corners. But his schedule after the bye, he only faces 2 corners like that over the rest of the season with Richard Sherman and just the whole Denver secondary. But he gets, Carolina at home this week could be like an outburst. So if you've been, it's mostly that this is the time to buy Cooks because this could be a big game for him coming out of the bye at home. At which point, the owner is like, okay, he's back. Cooks is himself again, and then you're paying too much to get him. If anything, it's almost like you're buying low, but really you're buying at a fair price of like a boomer bust wide receiver too, which you'd have to pay more than that regularly.
Yeah, definitely. No, and actually you just hit the nail on the head there. The one thing I was going to say was that this would be the time to buy because his value is really low. And as soon as he goes off, I mean, just like any other high equity draft pick where the owners are still holding on, like, okay, well, he's had, a good performance. He hasn't been a complete flop. Like, he's shown me his talent.
Yeah.
And then if he goes off again, then, okay, they're probably not going to sell. So I do agree with that. Still, I'm kind of like 50-50 on the whole Cooks thing at this point.
You can be wrong. That's fine.
So far, that's never happened in the history of Bench Stash. But
never happened. Let's move on to our next guy. This is one of the guys that you brought up, Jonathan Stewart, B-Stew.
Jonathan Stewart, I feel like he has kind of fallen off the radar a little bit. Carolina has not looked good. Nope. All right. They've been 1-4, Carolina Panthers. I don't think anybody saw that coming. But Jonathan Stewart, he's been banged up. All right. Now, Jonathan Stewart was a guy that you pumped heavily in the offseason. And although you did kind of fade a little bit towards the beginning of the season, but he was like a mid-round draft pick, probably like round 4 or 5 for a running back. And then he gets hurt, which is his MO. It's always a risk with Jonathan Stewart. It's kind of the story of his life. Story of his life.
Go on.
But anyways, back to the Jonathan Stewart narrative. So Jonathan Stewart may or may not come back this week.
Yeah.
All right. But he's nearing a return. And what makes Jonathan Stewart appealing to me, his schedule is the easiest in terms of starting running backs over the course of the rest of the season. And B, Cam Newton has been getting blown apart this year. I mean, it started in Denver when he was taking all those headshots. And boom, then it has just continued. Boom, headshot. has just continued throughout the past few games until he got hurt in that Atlanta game. And then as soon as he got hurt, there were whispers throughout the community, not just the fantasy community, but the NFL community. Like, I think you might see a scheme change in Carolina because obviously we saw that Derek Anderson is not very good. No. They need a healthy Cam to compete. It's still early enough in the year where they can turn it around, and in order to do that, Cam is going to be a focal point. He is their offense, essentially. So why am I talking about Cam Newton? Well, the whole thing with Jonathan Stewart is that his perceived value has always been affected by Cam Newton. Like, okay, Cam Newton is the goal line back. Jonathan Stewart might have, a decent floor, but he'll never be like the goal line, punch the ball into the end zone to get you that extra 6 points type of running back. But not only does he have the easiest schedule for running back, I think they're going to kind of veer away from having Cam take these hard hits where he's like trying to push the pile on the goal line. There will be times where he does it, but I think they're going to try to get the running backs more involved. And Jonathan Stewart will be that guy. So I think you'll see him heavily involved in the red zone. I think you'll see him as kind of the workhorse back. The only asterisk with Jonathan Stewart is his health. But I think his value right now is low enough where you can take that risk. Or you don't have to sacrifice a huge part of your team to get a Jonathan Stewart. Go out and get him because I do think he'll be a viable running back too throughout the rest of the year. And you mentioned Brandin Cooks having a soft schedule. Jonathan Stewart has a really soft schedule as well. Yeah. That's basically my whole spiel on Jonathan Stewart. How are you feeling about Jay Stewart?
I'm with you. I like it. He was someone that kind of fell off my radar once he got hurt, which means he might even be off the radar of the person who owns him. They might be even like contemplating dropping him if there wasn't news coming out that he might come back this week. But, it's a week before their bye week, so maybe they just say, let's hold him out and, get him back in after the bye. But either way, he's good to target this week because if he does play, he gets Nolans, which is a very good matchup. And I agree with your narrative that the Panthers are 1-4. If they're not going to keep doing what they've been doing, they need Cam to be healthy to win. He's been getting, blown up, so they need to kind of reevaluate how they use him a little bit.
Blown up.
And the schedule is just so soft. He faces New Orleans twice. He faces San Diego, Washington, Atlanta, Oakland. Oh, God, Oakland, right?
Those Raiders, 4-1.
So his schedule's good, and he could be reasonably cheap just because he's been hurt. What would you pay to get Jonathan Stewart?
Jonathan Stewart, I think right now you're not sacrificing a huge piece to get Jonathan Stewart. I might package somebody. This is a trade I'd make. Okay. I would trade Sammy Coates for Jonathan Stewart.
Ooh, that's a good trade. I think you could probably pull that off too.
I think that's probably doable, especially after Sammy Coates' nuclear week, which could have been like Julio Jones-esque if he would have caught the majority of the passes that were thrown his way. He could have easily had a 40-point game, and he settled with a mere 25, which is just terrible.
Yeah. If he was good, he wouldn't have had an awful week, basically.
He's somebody we might talk about in the sell segment. I don't think you really need to go out and sell Sammy Coates, but I think he could net you somebody like Jonathan Stewart. Depending on the makeup of your team, I think running back, the scarcity is real, and you need to set your team up with – it's real right now. You need to set your team up with depth in the running back position, or else you're going to be forced to roll out these RB2s, which just make you cringe. I've seen it in all the leagues I've been in. These teams that just have lost their starting running back, and then they're rolling out scraps, waiver wire scraps.
Yeah, it's just ugly when that happens.
Yeah, it's really ugly. So you know that there are running back needy teams, but on the same side of the coin, there are also teams that are looking for high upside wide receivers. So it always comes down to the makeup of your team. So all the trade proposals we put out there are obviously not going to work. You have to evaluate what other needs are for your opponents, and then go out and make the deal. So get Jonathan Stewart.
Get him.
Get him.
Let's move on to our next guy. This is like a pretty soft buy, I think, is where we landed when we discussed him. But he could be really cheap, which is Latavius Murray.
Latavius Murray, yeah. I like it. Because he probably fits into the Jonathan Stewart mold, actually.
Yeah.
Where he's kind of fallen off. I mean, he had kind of fallen off the radar before his injury because of his usage. His snap percentage was slowly declining going into the game against Baltimore where he got hurt, and that was his worst performance of the year. Latavius Murray owners are probably he's definitely on the bench at this point because of his turf toe, but even when he comes back, I don't know if owners will feel comfortable starting him unless they're absolutely desperate. So I think he's definitely somebody who you can go out and acquire. And the reason why I would go out and get him is because, A, he doesn't have a bad schedule. He actually has a pretty good schedule throughout the rest of the season. B, we just saw what the Raiders' running attack looks like without Latavius Murray. And it wasn't what I feel like a lot of people expected.
Yeah.
Right? And this goes not only with the fantasy community, but with the Oakland fan base, is that Latavius Murray has always been pegged as like this guy that doesn't have any vision. He can only run through gaping holes, and that's the only time he's any good. I mean, going back to his breakout performance against Kansas City a couple of years ago where he had that 90-yard touchdown run, people are like, well, even that run, he just ran through a hole. So he's been receiving a lot of hate, but this last week showed to me that he is incredibly vital to Oakland's offense. He is the best pass protector in the backfield, and Jack Del Rio puts a lot of value into that position because last week we saw Carr under the most amount of pressure that he's ever been under in terms of this season, because he had been one of those quarterbacks that had barely been touched.
Yeah.
Like his offensive line was so good, and Latavius Murray was so good as a blocker in terms of a running back that Carr basically had all day to throw. He was never hitting the dirt. This last week, he was under siege, and I'm not going to blame the running backs, but Latavius Murray was sorely missed. And then even in the running game, now I'm not going to say San Diego has like a terrible, terrible rush defense. They've actually been surprisingly adequate, but they're still not an elite run defense.
No.
And you had Jalen Richard and DeAndre Washington who were being hyped into oblivion. Like, oh, Latavius Murray's out of the way. It's time for these guys to shine, right? Latavius Murray can't do shit. DeAndre Washington's going to come in and just light the world on fire. That did not happen whatsoever.
No.
Actually, DeAndre Washington was the worst.
Yeah, Richard was better. That was a frustrating week of, oh, Latavius is going to miss. Obviously, DeAndre will be like the lead back in his absence with Richard just backing him up. And then Oakland beat reporters coming out and saying, no, it's going to be a split. With fantasy analysts, we're still like, no, it's still going to be Washington, at least 60-40. And then it wasn't that. It was a 50-50 split, and Richard was better. And that's...
Yeah, Richard totaled 97 yards, which is respectable, to DeAndre Washington's 52. Yeah. So, not great. And combined as a backfield, their yards per carry average was about 3.3. So it wasn't very good.
No.
Okay. And I watched the entire game. There were more runs where they just got stuffed at the line of scrimmage than I wanted to see, and than I think anybody wanted to see, because they were waiting for that breakout. There's Latavius Murray gets so much hate that I feel like they're still gonna kind of say, oh, well, it was just one game, but I think his value is low enough, Latavius Murray, where you should go out and try to trade for him now, because just listening to how JDR is talking to the press, he's basically saying that, like, okay, without explicitly saying it, that when Latavius comes back, he's going to be the guy, He was kind of saying, like, oh, I hope we can get him back this week. We'll welcome him back with open arms. But then he was kind of dancing around the questions about how the running backs performed this last week. He didn't throw them under the bus or anything, but they definitely needed to be better. I like Latavius Murray as kind of a cheap buy low.
Yeah, he's someone else that I think you might be able to get just for like Sammy Coates. I think he's in that similar range of like him, or maybe like Willie Snead if someone's still in on the hype he had earlier in the year. Because Latavius owner is probably pretty fed up at this point.
Yeah, Latavius, he's probably... I don't think he's dropped at this point, but he's on the back of somebody's bench, and they're probably willing to take whatever they can get for Latavius Murray.
And his schedule's good. He gets, if he's back this week, Chiefs, but then, Jacksonville, Tampa Bay, Denver, bye, and like Houston, Carolina, Buffalo. His playoff schedule is Chiefs, Chargers, Colts, and that's a pretty juicy playoff schedule for a running back.
Yeah, the Chiefs actually haven't been very good against the run, which is surprising.
Yeah.
But I like Latavius' schedule. Yeah. I think when he gets healthy, they will use him a lot more than what we've seen. Because I think the one thing that stood out to me was the pass protection. The pass protection really struggled. And you can also point to the fact that they lost their best pass blocking tight end, Lee Smith, who broke his leg in Baltimore. So he's done. But the running backs certainly didn't help matters. And all the beat writers are coming out and saying, like, all right, yeah, Latavius is a crucial part of that offense. I think they realized it this week that if he's not running the ball, then he's crucial in the pass protection. Yeah. So Latavius Murray, buy low. Next on the list is
Jeremy Maclin.
J-Mac.
Yeah, this one is just he's kind of underperformed since week one. But he's I didn't really understand why he was performing poorly. I didn't really see what the case was. But either way, they're coming out of the bye week, so you hope things have been rectified. And they get Oakland this week. The schedule's kind of open up and down. It's Oakland and New Orleans, which you like. Indy, which now they have Vontae back. It's not really that great for the number one wide receiver. But then Jacksonville, Carolina, Tampa Bay. His schedule is mostly pretty good the rest of the way. And he is, again, someone you could probably get very cheap because he's sitting at the end of someone's bench and they're just frustrated with him at this point.
Yeah, Jeremy Maclin I like. His schedule coming up, you just pointed it out. It's tasty for a wide receiver. They've already had their bye, which is also something attractive when you're looking at acquiring a player.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about his bye week. And typically, the bye week is where, when teams have these early buys, now they're often not very helpful for fantasy owners because you're dealing with the bye like super early in the season, which can be frustrating. But for a team, an NFL team that is struggling, like Kansas City is struggling, an early bye could be a boon for their players. We saw this with Lamar Miller last year. I think they had to bye the exact same week 5, and he was struggling, and then he came out in week 6 and just turned it up and finished as a top running back through the rest of the season. So, Kansas City, they got blown out in Pittsburgh their last game. They're probably looking at making some adjustments. Another thing to point out is that Jamal Charles should be back this week.
Yeah.
Which, in theory, if Jamal Charles is the Jamal Charles that we all know and love.
He will be.
He will be, yeah. Spoken like a true Jamal Charles owner.
Yeah.
That he should just make everybody in that offense better because teams are going to have to game plan a little bit because Jamal Charles is so versatile that, they're going to have to pay attention to him in the pass game. They're going to have to pay attention to him in the running game. Mm-hmm. And Jeremy Maclin should have a little bit more space to operate. And Alex Smith, even though he gets a lot of hate for being this game manager, he can still get the ball to Jeremy Maclin when he needs to get the ball to Jeremy Maclin. So, like you said, I mean, he's probably pretty cheap. I bet you could probably trade Sammy Coates for Jeremy Maclin. We keep on bringing up Sammy Coates. Not that we hate Sammy Coates, but I think his value is just so high right now that you have to take advantage before he, has the drop season another week and falls out of favor with the coaching staff, because that could happen.
I think it's pretty likely. We'll talk about him when we get to ourselves. But I'd even do like a couple other guys we'll talk about in ourselves, like Martellus Bennett for Jeremy Maclin. Might be possible if the guy's tight end 80, or even like I'd give up Terrence West for Jeremy Maclin because I don't buy it. I think it was nice for a couple weeks, but it's going to end soon for Terrence West. So
the end is near.
The end is near. Yeah. So Jeremy Maclin. Let's move on to. We won't go too in depth about this guy. Just kind of a reminder because we mentioned him last week. Doug Martin.
We always say we won't go too in depth. This section is already longer than I thought it would be. Even off air, we're like, all right, let's just keep it straight to the point, and then somehow we end up rambling.
With Doug Martin, all we're going to do is remind you of Sims is on the IR. He should be back and healthy after the bye, and he has probably the best running back schedule from here to the end of the season with San Francisco, Oakland, Atlanta, Chicago, Chiefs, get Seattle one, which isn't great, but then Chargers, and then in the playoffs, Saints, Cowboys, Saints, which is just like a dream slate for running back during the playoffs. And so he'll be – we saw with how much they ran Jaquiz, 35 touches last week because they just don't trust Winston to throw it. And so enter Doug Martin, who's actually a good running back, with no Sims there to eat into his workload. He could have a monster second half to the season. We outlined all this last week, but just a reminder that go get Doug Martin. We might have
probably the
chance.
Last week you can get him.
Yeah, because it's his bye week,
really.
and the owner might be like, I'm really sick of holding him, and it's in his bye. You're still gonna have to pay up a decent amount, but next week they're just gonna be like, no, he's back, and I want to use him, so it's gonna be hard to get him next week.
Yeah, another thing to pay close attention to is we're just getting to the point in the season where teams will be entering that desperation mode. If a team is sitting there at 1-4 or even 0-5. They don't have the luxury of holding these players on the bench. It turns into like, I have to take this week by week and win now. So when the bye weeks come up, we've seen this strategy before. I think you did this last year when you got off to a slow start, is you start selling off your high-end players that are on a bye because you can get value for that week. And essentially you have to win that week. Yeah. If you're in a situation where if you lose one more matchup, you're probably out of the playoff race, then you can't really just sit back and say, well, in a couple more weeks, Doug Martin will be back and he's going to be elite. Yeah. They could be 1-6 or 1-7 by that point.
It's too late for them, yeah.
So too late to apologize. So you really need to just go talk to the Doug Martin owner if they are struggling, because he's been out for a while. They could have kind of fallen off with the loss of Doug Martin.
Yeah, I mean, I've been poking around. I've been poking around with Doug Martin owners, and most of them are like, nah, I can hold a little bit longer. They're not desperate. It's really got to be the equation of like, they're desperate. They really need a win, and they can't hold Doug Martin. Otherwise, you're gonna have to pay like kind of a high price, which I guess I don't mind too much. But coming off of a hamstring injury, those have a way of sort of nagging on. And Doug Martin specifically has sort of a history of getting injured and then kind of being unproductive the rest of the year. So he's a buy, but I wouldn't sell the farm. It's more like if the situation is right.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, now's the time to buy him because of the bye, you probably don't have the luxury to sit back and wait until the practice reports come out next week.
No.
Because if they come out positive, then he will be untouchable, basically, if the owner is smart. It's a risk you have to take, really. As the practice reports come out negative, then you might be on the losing side of that trade. But I think the reward is so high with Doug Martin because you mentioned Jacquizz Rodgers. Mm-hmm. He looked good. I mean, he didn't look great, but he looked like, a startable running back in that game. And if Jacquizz Rodgers can look like a starting running back,
Doug Martin should look like a star.
Yeah, he should look just elite. Yeah, like RB1, the RB1.
The RB1. All right, let's move right along. Moving right along to John Brown. We've mentioned him I feel like every week. But
we're just pumping John Brown.
It's just, he had another down week. He really only had one big week, and but with Palmer coming back, he kind of hoped that boosts his production back up again. And because he's only had 1 out of 5 big weeks, he should be able to be had pretty cheap, I would think.
Yeah, the thing with John Brown is you just have to pay close attention to the way that Arizona has kind of been distributing not only their targets, but their playing time. Carson Palmer was healthy the game that they went to Buffalo and just got trounced, right? Then he suffered his injury the following week against the Rams, and then missed the game against the Niners on Thursday night. And in the 2 games prior to that Thursday night game, John Brown had basically taken over that second wide receiver, actually the number 1 outside receiver, because Fitzgerald is a slot guy. So up until that point, the first 2 games of the season, it was Michael Floyd. But something's not right with Michael Floyd. He does not look good. He's fallen out of favor. Even the coaches are saying, he's lost confidence. Something's not right with him. Maybe it's the stress of being in a contract year or whatever it is. Michael Floyd is basically droppable at this point.
Yeah, I think so.
Because he has no value whatsoever, and John Brown has supplanted him. Yeah. He is the number 1 outside receiver. And a lot of people will look at his 1.1 fantasy points against the 49ers, a terrible team, and say, oh, yeah. But you have to look, okay, Drew Stanton was a quarterback. Drew Stanton started the game 0 for 50 or whatever it was. He looked terrible in the first couple quarters, and then he realized, okay, I'm not going to be able to really throw the ball downfield with authority. I'm going to have to take these short, intermediate routes and feed Larry Fitzgerald, who's a slot guy. He's a veteran. He was kind of the safety blanket in that game. So Larry Fitzgerald was heavily targeted. They did try to get the ball downfield a couple of times to John Brown, but Stanton overthrew him. The one thing that was clear, snap percentage-wise, is that John Brown is the number 1 outside receiver. And I think we talked about this before with some other players, like Lamar Miller. This could be the last week that John Brown could be had for as cheap, because right now he should be very cheap. He should be very cheap. But who do they get this week? With Carson Palmer back, playing at home, they get the New York Jets, who have just been getting torched left, right, and center by these outside receivers. Okay? Not really the slot guys, but the outside receivers. Who is the outside receiver for Arizona? John Brown. Who was the outside receiver last week that torched them? Sammy Coates. And Sammy Coates could have had a much bigger day.
I like how everyone we talk about, we find a way to sneak in a jab at Sammy Coates.
Yeah, I know. We're hateful. Sammy Wotes.
Sammy Wotes. I'm with you on John Brown. It especially helps that Floyd's fallen out of favor, and Fitz is probably going to slow down in the second half just because of his age. He's not going to keep playing at his pace. Oh yeah, old man Fitzy. So Brown's going to be the number 1 target there, not just on the outside, but period, within a matter of a month. Probably the second half of the season is all John Brown. Now's the time to go out and get him, and he should be cheap. I would be surprised if the John Brown owner was asking for too much, unless they're also a bench stash listener, in which case, sorry about it.
Yeah, or they're me, because I own John Brown, so I'm not giving him up.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't either.
But yeah, just one last thing on John Brown. Just a quick reminder, if you forgot, in the last game that he had Carson Palmer, he had 16 targets. Yeah, 1-6 in the game, which is absurd. If you get a wide receiver that's getting anything over 10, 12 targets a game, then you're just you're joyous. So John Brown, keep an eye on him. I feel like this might be the last chance we get to talk about him because I'm feeling good about John Brown prime time against the Jets. Yeah. I think he's going to have his coming out party. And if he does it on Monday Night Football, are you ready for some football? Do they still use that song?
No, they changed it. I forget what it is, but
yeah, I just, living in Asia, I miss out on all these.
All right, enough of your
But anyways,
let's move on to, we got a couple more buys. We'll do these quickly, as we always say.
Quickly.
This guy's more of mine. I'm just going to throw out Eddie Lacy. Normally, I don't really like Eddie Lacy that much as a player. But
98.
But he's been good this year. He's averaged at least 4 yards a carry in every game. The game against Minnesota, he averaged over 4 yards a carry, which is looking really good now with how good that defense is. And then Detroit over 6 yards. This last week against the Giants, he was averaging over 7 yards a carry on his way to like a pretty big game before getting hurt. And he has his ankle injury, and things are kind of vague. He's a guy that you could probably go out and get a little bit cheaper before the injury news really clears up because he hasn't had any touchdowns yet. The positive touchdown regression will be on his side. He will start scoring touchdowns, especially in this offense, even if it is like still a little bit dysfunctional. The scoring opportunities will be there. And he's been good despite the fact that the passing offense is struggling a little bit. He's still been able to find running room because defenses are still respecting Aaron Rodgers just absolutely. And his schedule isn't that bad. And they always will. And his schedule isn't that bad. He's got Dallas, Chicago, Atlanta, Indy, Tennessee, Washington. His schedule is pretty good the rest of the way. A little rough during the playoffs. Seattle, Chicago, Minnesota. So you're probably trading him before the fantasy playoffs. But he's a nice guy to buy now, hold for 4 to 6 weeks, and then trade once he's sort of had some production.
Yep, I like it. Yeah, I mean, Eddie Lacy's he fits into that Lamar Miller mold a little bit just because he hasn't scored. He hasn't received the volume, but he's been more productive than Lamar Miller. Lamar Miller is struggling with some efficiency issues. Eddie Lacy's been efficient. He just hasn't scored, like you just said. He's been averaging over 4 yards per carry. He still plays in the Green Bay offense, which theoretically should be elite. Elite. So, yeah, I like a buy on Eddie Lacy.
Cool. Oh, yeah, well, that was all we need to be said about Eddie Lacy. Because I need a couple minutes to talk about my boy, this guy I've been waiting to throw out as a buy since week 1, Tyler Lockett. The time is now.
I'll let you take over on this one.
The time is now to buy Tyler Lockett. So he gets hurt in week 2. Week 1, he gets 8 targets, which is, it's pretty good. Week 2, he has 4 targets in the first quarter and a half, and he catches all of them for 99 yards. And then he gets hurt. Turns out he has a partial tear to his PCL, his injury he had. And then it's just ineffective through the next 2.5 games because he's hurt. But now he's had the bye to heal up. He practiced fully today. The reports are that he's in full health. They're going to get him back involved in the offense. And he gets Atlanta this week. And Trufant is kind of scary, but Trufant will likely be on Doug Baldwin. So it could be that Lockett kind of becomes the de facto secondary target there. The worry with Lockett, the sort of unexpected thing that has foiled a little bit of my sort of preseason projections for him is that Jimmy Graham is alive and well and is himself, it appears. And so that's kind of scary because if Jimmy Graham keeps being what he's been since, over the last few weeks, then this probably isn't a Lockett's the de facto number 2, but more of like a 2A, 2B, maybe even he's just the number 3 and Jimmy Graham's the number 2. The thing that has me thinking that the Jimmy Graham thing might be a little bit of a mirage is that it started as soon as Lockett got hurt in that week 2 game is when his production upticked and then has continued since then. So we haven't seen this offense with both of them at full health and full speed yet. This will be the first week we really see it. So it's one of them will probably have a nice game because they won't see Trufant. It's just which one is it? The good news with Lockett is he should be just so cheap since he's done nothing this year besides that one Rams game where he had still less than 10 points. He's really just done nothing. He might be on your waiver wire, which if he is, then go pick him up. But even if he's not, even if someone's still having him on the end of your bench, he's worth throwing someone else that you're stashing on the end of your bench. See if you can pull off some little swap. Because unless the Lockett owner is me, they're not hyped on him. I feel like I'm the only person that's still in on Tyler Lockett.
Yeah, I don't mind that. Now, a question I do have now, does a Jimmy Graham uptick coincide with the Tyler Lockett injury, or does it coincide with the Tommy Rawls injury and C-Mike awakening and forcing the opposing defenses to respect his elite talents.
It could be all of the above. I mean, that really, yeah, we saw the same thing. And basically, Lockett got hurt at the exact same time Rawls got hurt. And then C-Woke is like, all right, I got this. I'm on
don't worry, guys.
And then just started ripping off runs.
Woo, C-Mike.
C-Mike, man, he looks like the truth. He might, it's possible I'll be very sad in a month and I'll be, pumping him as a sell with Rawls coming back. Who knows? Future me is going to decide if I'm doing that or if I'm believing that C-Mike is this league-winning running back the rest of the way. We'll see what he does over the next month without Rawls.
He's got a nice little matchup this week.
He does. Against
Atlanta. And I was reading that there's some storm coming over Seattle that could heavily affect the. You never want to put too much credence into this type of thing. Sure. I mean, it's only Wednesday, but typically when conditions are bad, it turns into more of a running fest.
Lean on C-Mike. But the one thing that worries me a little bit with C-Mike, now that we're just on a C-Mike tangent, is that
we were talking about Lockett to begin with. And now C-Mike is just taking over like he's taking over the Seattle backfield.
Is a lot of his sort of emergence also coincided with Procise being hurt. But now Procise is practicing fully, and so it's probably going to play this week. So he might lose some of that passing down work to Procise, and then he's not a 3-down back. He's just a 2-down back, which is still pretty valuable in this offense. But he might not quite be the bell cow we've seen over the last couple of weeks. We'll see what happens. Maybe Procise is bad. That's definitely a possibility. Okay. And then he might just keep running with it.
CJ Spiller.
CJ Spiller vultures a touchdown against the Jets. Everyone tilts.
Woo. Well, now that they've had the bye week to acclimate CJ Spiller into the offense a little bit more,
he looked good, man. On his whatever it was, 4 touches in that game, he looked like an NFL
fantasy relevant?
Back. No.
Okay.
No. If Procise wasn't on the team, then maybe he'd be like PPR, like flex worthy, I guess. But no, he's not. Absolutely not.
All right.
That's it for our buys.
Let's cap it there. Buys, go out and get these guys. You might have to pay fair value. These are just names we're throwing out that we like schedule-wise, that we like to turn their season around if they're having a little bit of a slow start. Mm-hmm. But go out and get them. Bench Stash approved. Follow us on Twitter. Twitter is above you, right?
It is. Yes.
Yeah, okay. At Bench Stash FF, and Facebook is the same, right up here.
Bam.
Give us your comments, your feedback, your love or hate. We take it all. We appreciate it all. And that's it.
Indeedy. We'll be doing sells here in a little bit, but until then, we'll catch you on the flippity floppity.
Flippity floppy spirit fingers.
Ooh.